Welcome back to Women's Stories, where we bring your most intense stories of justice and transformation to life. Today, we have a staggering submission from a viewer, a narrative we're calling The Caribbean Con Game. This is the unbelievable story of Eleanor Hayes, a dignified widow whose future daughter-in-law systematically poisoned her on a luxury cruise to steal her entire estate. If you've ever had your trust broken or felt like your mind was being taken from you, this is a story that demands attention. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the ultimate downfall of this predator. And if you have a story of ultimate justice or a shocking reckoning, send it to us now at womenstoriess@segmail.com. Before you hear my story, let me ask you something. What would you do if the person you loved most in this world was being manipulated and you were too blind with grief and loneliness to see the danger? What if you realized you had been living with a predator for months, someone who was meticulously and methodically dismantling your life, not with a sudden attack, but one slow, measured dose at a time? I should have seen it coming from day one. The signs were all there. Subtle red flags I mistook for kindness and welcome mats. My name is Eleanor Ellie Hayes. I'm 72 years old. Widow, retired professor of classics, and dedicated amateur landscape painter. I've always prized quiet contemplation over lavish displays. My life in the quaint, historic district of a non-disclosed coastal town was simple, filled with gardening, academic journals, and the memory of my late husband, Arthur. My son, Marcus, called on a Tuesday evening. His voice had that excited, almost brittle edge I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, I want you to meet someone genuinely special. Are you free for dinner at a non-disclosed upscale restaurant this weekend?" My heart did a little flutter. Not because of romance. Lord knows I'd given up on finding love again after losing Arthur. But because it had been so long since Marcus sounded genuinely happy. His success had made him distant. His investment banking firm, a non-disclosed financial group, consumed 18-hour days, and our monthly visits had gradually become holiday visits with awkward, rushed hugs. Saturday night arrived, and I spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing the right outfit. Nothing too ostentatious, but elegant enough to make a good first impression. The restaurant was one of those exclusive places downtown, with crisp white tablecloths and waiters who moved with silent precision. When Marcus walked in holding hands with this stunning brunette, I understood immediately why he'd been so distracted lately. She was the kind of elegant that makes other women immediately feel underdressed. Tall, poised, with perfectly tailored clothing that probably cost more than my quarterly investment returns. "Mom, this is Serafina, but call her Sarah," he said, his face glowing in a way I hadn't seen since he was 10 and won his first science fair. "Mrs. Hayes, I've heard so much about you," Sarah said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Her smile seemed genuine, warm, and her grip was firm without being aggressive. "Marcus talks about you constantly. He's told me all about your conservation efforts and how you practically fund the entire restoration project at the A Non-Disclosed Historical Society." I offered a skeptical smile. "Really? Because he barely has time to return my calls these days. But sure, let's go with that narrative." During dinner, Sarah hung on my every word as if I were dispensing lost Stoic wisdom. She complimented my antique emerald brooch, inherited from Arthur's mother. "It's absolutely breathtaking, Rose. The craftsmanship is timeless. Where did you acquire such a piece?" She asked thoughtful questions about Arthur's architectural career, and even wanted to know about my volunteer work at the local, a non-disclosed wildlife sanctuary. When I mentioned how quiet the house had gotten since Arthur passed, how I sometimes went days without a meaningful conversation, she practically sighed with sympathy. "Oh, Eleanor, may I call you Ellie? You shouldn't be alone so much. That's simply heartbreaking." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "Marcus, didn't you mention that cruise we booked for next month? The one to the Mediterranean on the non-disclosed luxury liner?" Marcus looked genuinely surprised, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "Well, yes, but I thought we'd discussed keeping it just the two of us, darling." "Ellie should come with us." Sarah's enthusiasm bubbled over naturally. "It'll be perfect, just the three of us bonding. I'd absolutely love to get to know my future mother-in-law better. Please say yes, Ellie. It would mean the world to me." Future mother-in-law. The words hit me right in the chest, filling that empty space that had been aching since Arthur died. Someone wanted me around. Someone was planning a future that included me. I said yes before Marcus could raise any further objections. Honestly, I would have said yes to a trip to the moon if it meant feeling wanted again. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I became practically inseparable, and I started feeling like I had a daughter for the first time in my life. Shopping trips to the non-disclosed high-end mall, where she'd actually ask my opinion on designer jackets. Coffee dates where she'd listen to me ramble about Arthur's eccentric habits and his obsession with restoring antique clocks. Long lunches where she'd encourage me to order dessert and tell me stories about her luxury real estate job that made me laugh until my cheeks hurt. She was everything I'd hoped for in a daughter-in-law. Attentive without being clingy, sweet without being saccharine, genuinely interested in my life without seeming like she was interviewing me for something. Or so I thought. God, I was such a fool. During one of our shopping excursions to that fancy mall, she seemed absolutely mesmerized by my house. We'd stopped by so I could grab my exclusive non-disclosed bank credit card, and she walked through the rooms with this dreamy, almost reverent expression. Her fingers traced the inlaid wood paneling in the study. She stood for a full minute, admiring the bespoke lighting fixture Arthur had designed for our 40th anniversary, and she spent way too long staring at the expansive ocean view from the master bedroom balcony. "Ellie, this place is like something from a classic film," she sighed, settling into Arthur's old, worn leather reading chair in the library, testing how it felt. "I bet you wake up every morning feeling like absolute nobility. The light, the space, the way everything flows together. It's just perfect." "It's just a house, dear," I said, though her appreciation was flattering. "Arthur and I were lucky, but it's truly too big for just me now." She shook her head firmly, her eyes still scanning the room like she was memorizing every detail. "No, it's not just a house. This is an architectural masterpiece. Someone could live here forever and never want to leave. Never need to leave." The way she said those last words, "never need to leave," gave me an odd, icy chill, but I brushed it off as excessive enthusiasm. Maybe she was just imagining her future with Marcus. That same afternoon, I made what I now realize was a crucial mistake. While we were at the department store, I left my purse with her for a few minutes when I ducked into the restroom. She was examining a scarf from a non-disclosed designer brand, chatting with the sales associate about how silk scarves are always an investment, and it seemed natural to ask her to watch my things. When I came back, nothing seemed out of place. My wallet was where I'd left it. My keys were still clipped to the inside pocket, and Sarah was exactly where I'd left her, now trying on a pair of vintage sunglasses that made her look like a movie star. But thinking back now, with everything I know, that was probably when it started, when she had access to my purse, my pill organizer, My whole life condensed into that one expensive leather bag. "Ready to go grab lunch?" she asked brightly, linking her arm through mine like we were old friends. I should have been more careful. I should have paid attention to how she seemed to know exactly where everything was in my house after just one visit. I should have wondered why someone on a luxury real estate agent's salary needed to be so frugal. But I was so starved for companionship, so desperate to feel needed and wanted again, that I ignored every instinct screaming at me to be cautious. What I didn't know was that my peaceful retirement was about to become a living nightmare. And the woman I was growing to love, like the daughter I never had, was already planning to destroy me from the inside out, one carefully measured dose at a time. The confusion started about a week before the cruise was due to depart. At first, I convinced myself it was just stress, maybe the excitement about the trip, or the natural anxiety that comes with getting older and facing the fact that your mind might not be as sharp as it used to be. It began with small things that I desperately tried to laugh off. I woke up in my primary guest bathroom one Tuesday morning, standing in front of the mirror in my nightgown, completely disoriented. For several terrifying minutes, I couldn't remember if I was at home or in some impersonal hotel room. The polished granite tiles under my bare feet felt foreign. The reflection staring back at me looked like a stranger, and my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Get it together, Ellie," I whispered to myself, gripping the antique porcelain sink until my knuckles went white. "You're in your own house. This is your bathroom. You've lived here for over 40 years. But the confusion lingered like a thick coastal fog, making everything feel unreal and utterly disconnected. Later that same day, I ran into my longtime acquaintance, Mrs. Albright, at the non-disclosed local market. Mrs. Albright, who I'd known since Arthur and I started the non-disclosed historical society 20 years ago, who'd brought me the finest artisan bread after Arthur's funeral, and still relied on my expertise for the annual conservation benefit auction. She was standing right in front of me in the organic produce section, holding a bag of imported figs and smiling warmly. "Ellie, how are you holding up, dear?" she asked. I stared at her face, familiar, yet suddenly nameless, and felt my brain scramble frantically for information that should have been automatic. The silence stretched uncomfortably while she waited for me to respond, her smile starting to fade into concern. I'm sorry, Mrs. Albright. I'm having one of those days," I finally managed, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. "You know how it is. Early morning brain. Are you feeling all right?" Mrs. Albright's voice carried that careful, concerned tone people use when they're worried, but trying desperately not to show it. "You look a little pale, just tired." "Just tired," I lied, because what else could I say? That I was losing my mind at 72? That I couldn't immediately recall the name of someone I'd known for decades? The shame was profound, and I fled the market quickly, convinced I needed to consult a specialist the moment I returned from the cruise. When I told Marcus about these episodes during our next phone call, I tried to keep my voice light and casual, framing them as amusing little quirks instead of terrifying glimpses into what felt like the onset of early dementia. "It's probably just stress, Mom," he said. But his voice sounded distant, distracted by the clicking of a keyboard, whatever urgent financial model was on his computer screen. "Or maybe you need a change of scenery. Good thing you're coming on the cruise with us. Sea air, relaxation, no responsibilities. It'll be perfect for resetting." Before I could respond, I heard Sarah's voice in the background, quick, sharp, and concerned. Then she was on the phone, her tone warm, enveloping, and meticulously reassuring. "Ellie, sweetie, don't worry about those little memory hiccups. My Aunt Clara went through something similar when she hit her mid-70s. Just age catching up with her, sadly. You know, the ocean air will do you absolute wonders. Sometimes we just need to get away from our routines and let our minds reset." Her Aunt Clara. She mentioned her so casually, like it was just normal, unfortunate family history. But something about the way she said it, the practiced cadence, the immediate shift to a known scenario, bothered me in a way I couldn't articulate. "What happened to your Aunt Clara?" I asked, my curiosity suddenly getting the better of my polite reserve. There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause before she answered, the warmth in her voice deepening to a velvety sincerity. "Oh, she's doing much better now. She's in a lovely care facility, a non-disclosed exclusive retirement home where she gets all the structured help she needs. Very peaceful, very serene. She seems quite content there, actually. Full-time care, no worries." The entire story felt too perfectly aligned, too neatly resolved. But I was exhausted and ashamed, and I let it pass, only commenting on how expensive those lovely care facilities could be. Sarah simply laughed softly and changed the subject to the new wardrobe she was planning for the Mediterranean trip. The incidents kept happening with increasing frequency. I'd find myself standing in my library with no memory of walking there, holding a half-finished cup of tea, and wondering if I'd been planning to water the non-disclosed exotic indoor plant instead. I'd start telling stories to my reflection in the dressing room mirror and forget the endings halfway through. Once I got lost driving to the non-disclosed art gallery for a board meeting, a route I'd taken hundreds of times over the years, suddenly feeling as foreign as if I'd been dropped into a different city. But here's what's really twisted about the whole situation. Every time something happened, every time I had one of these frightening episodes, Sarah would show up within hours. She'd arrive with homemade, a non-disclosed specialty soup or fresh-baked artisanal bread, settling into my kitchen like she belonged there, full of sympathy and deep concern. "You poor thing," she'd say, stirring organic honey into my herbal tea with such careful attention. "These things happen to all of us eventually. The important thing is not to stress about it. Stress just makes everything worse." I thought she was taking care of me, being the devoted future daughter-in-law who genuinely cared about my well-being. Turns out, she was just monitoring her handiwork, making sure the poison was working exactly as planned. I noticed that the medications I'd been taking for years, blood pressure pills, calcium supplements, a mild antidepressant my physician had prescribed after Arthur died, lately looked subtly different than I remembered. The shapes were subtly wrong. The colors not quite what I expected. I mentioned this to my local pharmacist, who waved it off. "Generic brands often vary in appearance, Mrs. Hayes. Pharmaceutical companies change their manufacturing processes, use different dyes, different coatings. Nothing to worry about." It made sense at the time. Why would I doubt a medical professional? Furthermore, Sarah also started carrying my purse during our daily excursions to the historic district. She claimed she wanted to help since I seemed a bit scattered lately. So thoughtful of her, so considerate, I thought. She'd take charge of my room key, my credit cards, even my lip balm, organizing everything in that efficient way that made me feel taken care of instead of diminished. "You just focus on enjoying yourself," she'd say warmly. "Let me handle the details. That's what family is for." I should have known better. I should have paid attention to the way she had subtly gained control over the smallest, most personal aspects of my daily life. Little did I know, I was about to board a luxury cruise ship where the isolation of the ocean would only accelerate her schedule. By the time we set sail, I was convinced I was going mad, and my supposed daughter-in-law had successfully positioned herself as my primary caregiver and guardian. The non-disclosed luxury liner was absolutely magnificent when we boarded in a non-disclosed port city. It was all gleaming glass elevators and polished marble floors, like a floating palace designed to make you forget you were surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean. The lobby had a multi-story atrium and enough exotic, fragrant flowers to stock a wedding, and I felt a flutter of genuine, almost childlike excitement for the first time in months. Serafina squealed with delight at everything, bouncing on her toes like a child at a grand amusement park. "Ellie, look at this place. It's like something from a classic Hollywood movie." She grabbed my arm, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. "We're going to have the most amazing time. I can already feel myself relaxing, leaving all those dreary concerns on shore." I felt the genuine excitement radiating off her, but Marcus seemed oddly subdued as we went through the check-in process. While Sarah chatted animatedly with the staff about dinner reservations and the ship's famous, a non-disclosed casino, he stood slightly apart, scrolling through his secure mobile phone with a frown that deepened with each incoming message. "Everything all right, honey?" I asked, touching his arm gently. He looked up, startled, like he'd forgotten we were even there. "Oh yeah, Mom, just work stuff. The non-disclosed merger at the firm is hitting some snags, and my partners are—" He shook his head, shoving the phone into the inner pocket of his bespoke jacket. "It's fine. I'm supposed to be on vacation, right? I need to disconnect." "That's right," Sarah said firmly, reappearing at his other side with our room keys. "No work, no stress, no thinking about anything except having fun together." She handed me my key card with a bright, encouraging smile. "Ellie, you're just down the hall from us. Stateroom a non-disclosed number, so we'll practically be neighbors. Easy access for morning coffee and late-night talks." The proximity was immediately comforting to me, given my recent episodes, but looking back, I realize it was a crucial part of her meticulous control. Our first night, we met for dinner in the main dining room, a space so grand it made me feel slightly underdressed despite wearing my best cocktail dress, a classic silk number Arthur loved. The waiters moved like professional dancers. The crystal glasses caught the light like tiny prisms, and the menu featured sophisticated dishes I hadn't even heard of since leaving academia. Marcus was making a visible effort to be present, asking me about my plans for the next day's port visit and complimenting Sarah's breathtaking gold gown, a piece of liquid metal that cost a fortune. But there was something strained in his smile, a tension around his eyes that reminded me of how he'd looked as a teenager when he was desperately trying to hide a failing grade. "You seem tired, sweetheart," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "Are you sure you're feeling all right? You look like you haven't slept in a week." "Just need to adjust to being away from the office," he said. But his laugh sounded forced and brittle. "It's harder than I thought it would be to completely disconnect when you're managing billions." After dinner, we strolled around the ship's a non-disclosed promenade deck, admiring the way the moonlight painted a silver path across the dark, vast water. Sarah linked arms with both of us, chattering about all the activities she wanted to try: the high ropes course, the artisan cocktail-making classes, the ballroom dance lessons. "This is perfect," she sighed contentedly. "Just the three of us. No distractions, no interruptions. We can really get to know each other without the city noise." But as we headed back to our staterooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Maybe it was the way Marcus kept checking his phone, even though we were in the middle of the ocean with spotty satellite service. Maybe it was how Sarah seemed almost too enthusiastic, like she was performing happiness rather than genuinely feeling it. Her cheer felt calculated, a distraction technique. As they walked me to my cabin door, the atmosphere was thick with unsaid things. Marcus gave me a tight, quick hug. "Good night, Mom. Try to get some sleep. You need the rest." "You too, dear," I said, watching him look over his shoulder at Sarah with a troubled frown before opening their cabin door. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard voices from their cabin next door. The walls were thinner than I'd expected, cheap cruise ship construction, and their conversation carried clearly through the ventilation system, which was directly above my bed. Marcus's voice was low but agitated. "I never discussed this timeline with you, Sarah. This wasn't part of the original plan. We agreed to wait until the legal documents were finalized." Sarah's voice was higher and sharper, cutting through his anxiety. "Plans change, Marcus. We don't have a choice now. Her episodes are getting worse, exactly as predicted. The opportunity is right here, isolated on this ship. Don't be an idiot." "This is going too far," he protested, his voice laced with genuine panic. "I'm not comfortable with the how of this." "Since when do you get uncomfortable about anything that benefits us both?" she retorted, her voice dropping to an icy whisper that somehow still carried. "You want the control of the Hayes estate and the capital for a non-disclosed financial group or not? Stop being sentimental, Elliot. It's almost done." Their voices dropped to urgent, furious whispers after that. The tension was unmistakable, sounding less like a couple's disagreement and more like two conspirators arguing over the final step of a major, irreversible heist. I pressed my ear to the wall, heart pounding like a drum against my ribs, trying desperately to make out more words. All I could hear were urgent, angry murmurs and the unsettling sound of a non-disclosed legal-looking paper, shuffling. The timeline, the plan, her episodes, the Hayes estate. The next morning, they were all smiles again, acting like the perfect, affectionate couple planning their perfect future together. Sarah brought me strong coffee in bed. "I thought you might like to start the day slowly," she said sweetly. And Marcus seemed more relaxed, asking about my plans for the day and suggesting we all meet for lunch. But I couldn't forget what I'd heard. Couldn't stop wondering what plan they'd been discussing and why Marcus had seemed so resistant to some kind of irreversible timeline. Little did I know, I was about to discover just how wrong my initial instincts really were and how much danger I was actually in. The isolation of the sea meant there was nowhere to run. By the third day, my confusion episodes were getting noticeably worse, and I was starting to genuinely panic about what was happening to my mind. The incidents weren't just occasional lapses anymore, they were frequent, frightening, and completely unpredictable. I woke up around 3 in the morning, not in my comfortable stateroom bed, but on the ship's non-disclosed observation deck. I was standing by the railing in my silk pajamas and slippers, shivering uncontrollably in the cool night air, with no memory whatsoever of leaving my cabin. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, black and mysterious under the sparse, star-filled sky. For several terrifying minutes, I couldn't remember my own name, let alone how I'd gotten there, or what the purpose of my standing in the freezing cold was. My heart hammered with fear, but I forced myself to focus on the distant horizon until the fog began to clear. A security officer, a young man with a serious face and a neatly pressed uniform, found me about 20 minutes later. "Ma'am, are you all right?" His voice was gentle but firm, carrying that careful tone people use with confused elderly individuals they fear might wander into danger. "I'm fine," I said automatically, gripping the cold railing until my fingers ached, though nothing about the situation was fine. "Just getting some air. The stateroom felt too stuffy." "It's pretty cold out here for just pajamas, Mrs. Hayes," he said diplomatically. "We're not supposed to have passengers up here this late without supervision. Can I escort you back to your cabin?" The walk back was utterly mortifying. Other passengers we passed in the hallways, returning from the casino or a late-night show, stared at me with that potent mixture of pity and discomfort people show when they witness someone else's dignity crumbling in real time. I kept my head high, but inside I was crumbling. I realized then that the public nature of these episodes was perhaps the true objective. At breakfast the next morning, Serafina was extra attentive, hovering around me like a concerned, vigilant nurse. "You look utterly exhausted, Ellie," she said, her voice full of perfectly modulated sympathy as she slid into the seat across from me. "Did you sleep badly? Sometimes the motion of the ship can be disorienting, even for a seasoned traveler." "I'm fine," I repeated, the word becoming a hollow mantra, but my hands were shaking as I reached for my coffee cup. "Here, I brought you some fresh pineapple juice," she said, placing a tall glass in front of me with a bright, encouraging smile. "Fresh, squeezed from the non-disclosed specialty juice bar. And don't forget your morning medications. It's so important to stay on schedule, especially when our routines are disrupted." She was right, of course. I'd been taking the same combination of medications for years. But when I mentioned to the ship's doctor, during what Sarah had insisted was a routine wellness check requested by Marcus, that the pills looked slightly different than I remembered. The shapes were subtly wrong, the colors not quite what I expected. He nodded dismissively. "Generic brands often vary in appearance, Mrs. Hayes," the doctor said, glancing at my chart and then quickly back at his notepad. "Pharmaceutical companies change their manufacturing processes, use different dyes, different coatings. As long as you're getting them from the same non-disclosed pharmacy brand, there is nothing to worry about. It's perfectly normal, especially as one adjusts to the maritime environment." It sounded sensible, a scientific explanation for my paranoia. Why would I doubt a medical professional? Sarah smiled sweetly through the whole consultation, holding my hand and rubbing my arm soothingly, projecting the image of the devoted future daughter-in-law. Sarah also started carrying my small, everyday bag during our daily excursions around the ship. She claimed she wanted to help since I seemed a bit scattered lately. So thoughtful of her, so considerate. She'd take charge of my room key, my smaller credit card, and even my reading glasses, organizing everything in that efficient, proprietary way that made me feel taken care of instead of diminished. "You just focus on enjoying yourself," she'd say warmly, gently guiding me by the elbow through crowded areas. "Let me handle the details. You don't need the stress of finding your card for a purchase or remembering the stateroom number." That afternoon, while she and Marcus were supposedly at the ship's a non-disclosed luxury spa getting a specialized couples treatment, I decided to rest in my cabin. But as I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant sounds of laughter from the pool deck, fragments of their whispered conversation from the previous night kept replaying in my mind. The timeline they'd discussed. The plan that was apparently benefiting both of them. The way Marcus had seemed so resistant to whatever Sarah was pushing for. And then there was the story about her Aunt Clara. The memory issues. The contentment in the lovely care facility. Something about that entire narrative, when placed against my own rapidly disintegrating mental state, felt utterly rehearsed, like she'd told it many times before to many different people. I sat up abruptly, a wave of cold clarity washing over me, temporarily overriding the fog of the medication. The goal wasn't just to upset me. The goal was to make me appear mentally incompetent. If I was ruled incapable of managing my own affairs, they could apply for guardianship. They could gain control of the Hayes estate, the vast and non-disclosed art collection, and the valuable house in a non-disclosed coastal town. They could put me in one of those serene, peaceful facilities, exactly like Aunt Clara's, and never have to worry about the legal documents or the timeline again. The sudden realization made the skin crawl on my arms. The danger wasn't theoretical stress or aging. It was active, malicious sabotage. Someone had been systematically drugging me, and it was the person I had desperately welcomed back into my heart. But here, isolated on the A non-disclosed luxury liner, I had no access to external help, no immediate escape route, and my son was either a co-conspirator or a deeply manipulated fool. The thought of confronting them filled me with dread, but the thought of becoming the next Aunt Clara filled me with a cold, desperate resolve. I had to wait. I had to watch. I had to confirm my terrifying suspicions before the final, irreversible step of their plan was executed. I knew that the climax of their timeline was fast approaching. It was formal night on the ship, and the main dining room, the grand Arthurian hall, had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Heavy velvet drapes framed the large portholes. Crystal chandeliers, not sparkling, but casting a warm, almost amber light. Illuminated tables draped in pristine white linens. The live classical orchestra played a refined waltz that made conversation feel intimate and meaningful, masking the tension beneath the surface. Serafina looked absolutely breathtaking in a midnight blue velvet gown that was both modest and stunning, clinging to her figure like liquid sapphire and catching the amber light every time she moved. The dress likely cost more than the annual operating budget of the A non-disclosed wildlife sanctuary I supported, and the thought made me wonder again how someone on a luxury real estate agent's salary could justify such continuous extravagance. Perhaps Marcus had bought it for her, as he always enjoyed lavishing gifts on those he admired. "You look beautiful tonight, dear," I told her, genuinely. We were seated at our usual preferred table near the elevated platform where the musicians were playing. "Thank you, Ellie. You look exceptionally elegant yourself in that silver gray silk. It complements your eyes." She reached across and squeezed my hand affectionately. "I'm so glad we're all here together. This has been such a perfect trip, hasn't it? A real chance to disconnect." Her smile was dazzling, flawless, and deeply unsettling. Marcus seemed more relaxed than he'd been all week, actually laughing easily at Sarah's anecdotes about her most challenging clients and asking me in detail about my plans for restoring the antique writing desk when we returned home. For the first time since we'd boarded, he seemed genuinely present and engaged, instead of distracted by invisible worries or guilt. I hoped desperately that the overheard conversation had been a misinterpretation, a conflict over a clean legal guardianship that Marcus was simply uncomfortable pushing. When the live band started playing the Grand Waltz of St. Petersburg, a slow, sweeping piece that Arthur and I had danced to at our 25th anniversary, Serafina's eyes lit up with delight. "Oh, I adore this piece. It's so romantic." "Marcus, you have to dance with me." She stood and extended her perfectly manicured hand with a playful, insistent smile. "I'm not much of a dancer, Sarah, you know that," he protested, though he was already pushing back his antique wooden chair. He was trying to resist, but her pull was magnetic, or perhaps simply programmed. "That's what makes it fun, my love," she laughed, pulling him toward the polished, circular dance floor where other couples were already swaying gracefully to the music. I smiled, watching them move together under the soft, amber glow. Marcus was right. He was clumsy. But Sarah compensated for his awkwardness with natural, stunning grace, guiding him through simple steps that made them look like they belonged together, a golden couple with a beautiful future. Maybe I'd been overthinking everything, I thought, a desperate wish for peace bubbling up. Maybe they'd just been stressed about wedding planning and financial pressures, and I'd misinterpreted normal couple tensions as something sinister. It was precisely at that moment, when my gaze was fixed on their distracting, synchronized movements on the dance floor, that the waitress appeared beside my table. The waitress was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with concerned brown eyes and the kind of serious, focused expression that immediately put my high alert on. She opened a leather-bound wine list, not the dessert menu, in front of me, with deliberate, professional precision. She said, just loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Here is the special list of a non-disclosed rare vintage wine you requested, ma'am. The sommelier wanted you to review it personally." I hadn't requested any list, special or otherwise. Confused, I looked down at the open page, expecting to see a list of exorbitant prices. Instead, there was a non-disclosed ship-branded cocktail napkin tucked precisely between the pages, and my initials, E.H., were written on it in hasty blue ink. My hands trembled almost imperceptibly as I unfolded the napkin under the cover of the heavy menu. The message, scrawled quickly, hit me like a physical blow. "I saw her put something in your drink when she got up to dance. Small white powder from a tiny bottle in her velvet purse. Don't react. Switch glasses when she returns. Get help immediately." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The initial shock was so profound, it actually cleared the fog in my mind completely. I looked up at the waitress, Celia, as I later learned her name, who was still standing beside my table with professional composure, but her eyes were intense, worried, and waiting. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the music, using every ounce of my self-control to keep my expression neutral. "This list is quite helpful." She gave me the slightest, almost invisible nod of acknowledgement and walked away toward the service door, leaving me alone with the most terrifying, validating revelation of my life. I looked toward the dance floor where Sarah was twirling gracefully in Marcus's arms, her expensive dress catching the light like stars, her laughter carrying over the music. She looked so beautiful, so happy, so perfectly innocent. Then I looked at our table. 2 elegant crystal glasses of a non-disclosed expensive red wine sat side by side. Mine half empty, hers barely touched. They looked identical, filled with the same deep burgundy liquid. Without allowing myself to process the betrayal, without hesitating long enough to talk myself out of the sheer horror of it, I acted purely on instinct and a sudden, primal need for self-preservation. I reached out a steady hand and switched the 2 glasses. When they returned to the table 5 minutes later, both slightly breathless and smiling, Sarah was radiant with self-satisfaction. She settled into her chair and immediately reached for her wine glass, my poisoned glass, raising it in a toast. "To family," she announced clearly, "and to the most perfect vacation and the beautiful future we have planned." "To family," Marcus echoed, raising his own glass, looking relieved the dance was over. I lifted mine with a hand that, astonishingly, did not shake, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "To family, indeed," I said, and watched her take a long, satisfied, poisonous sip of the wine that was supposed to destroy me. It started subtly. Serafina began blinking more frequently, like she was having trouble focusing on the polished silverware or our mundane dinner conversation. She touched her temple delicately and made a small, slightly high-pitched comment about the Grand Arthurian Hall feeling unexpectedly warm, though the ship's climate control was perfectly comfortable. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, noticing her slightly glazed, unfocused expression. "I'm fine, my love," she said, but her words came out just a fraction slower than normal, the practiced elegance of her voice beginning to fray. "Just, the non-disclosed expensive red wine is stronger than I expected, perhaps. Or the motion of the vessel." She had barely had half a glass, but I wasn't about to correct her. 10 minutes later, she started slurring her words, just slightly at first, then more noticeably, mixing her tenses and struggling to form cohesive sentences. The lights are so sparkly tonight," she giggled, staring up at the crystal chandeliers with eyes that were losing focus. "Like little diamonds dancing in the air, Marcus. Have you ever noticed how diamonds dance, Ellie?" Marcus frowned deeply, setting down his dessert fork, the tension immediately returning to his face, erasing his earlier relaxation. "Sarah, are you sure you're okay? You've hardly had anything to drink besides that half glass of wine." She tried to stand, perhaps to move away from the light, and swayed dangerously, catching herself on the back of her antique-style wooden chair. "I feel floaty, darling, like I'm on a cloud. Everything's moving, but in a good way." "Maybe you should sit down," I suggested, working hard to keep the satisfaction out of my voice and maintain a facade of neutral concern. "The motion of the ship can be deceptively disorienting sometimes." She looked at me then, with pupils that were dilated and unfocused, her beautiful, sculpted face slack with confusion. "Ellie, did you know? Did you know the ocean has secrets?" She giggled, her voice getting louder, drawing the attention of nearby tables. "So many secrets swimming around down there in the dark, waiting to be discovered." "You're not making any sense, Sarah," Marcus said, his face flushed with acute embarrassment and mounting concern. "Let's go. You need to lie down." "But I don't want to lie down," she protested, her words slurring together into an almost childish whine. "I want to tell Ellie about the secrets. She should know about the secrets because they're her secrets too. Sort of. They belong to the beautiful, non-disclosed coastal townhouse, you see." My heart pounded fiercely. Even drugged and incoherent, was she about to confess the entire systematic plot she'd been executing? "You are not making sense," Marcus said firmly, standing and moving quickly to help her up. He was now thoroughly panicked, looking like a man whose perfectly constructed public image was collapsing around him. "That's enough. Come on, Sarah. Let's get you back to the room so you can sleep this off." As he guided her toward the elevator, she kept talking, her voice erratic and loud, rambling nonsense about floating castles, golden fish, and how beautiful it would be to live in a palace by the sea forever and ever. The same kind of confused, disconnected, and slightly delusional speech I'd been experiencing for weeks. The same frightening loss of mental clarity that had made me question my own sanity. Except now I knew the difference. It wasn't natural. It wasn't age or stress or early dementia. Someone had been systematically drugging me, and I had just watched them get a potent, public taste of their own terrible medicine. The moment they disappeared into the elevator doors, Marcus awkwardly supporting his babbling, swaying fiancée, I acted. I scanned the massive dining hall for the young woman who had saved my life. I spotted the waitress, Celia, clearing a nearby table near the kitchen entrance, moving efficiently through her duties. But when she saw me approaching, she set down her heavy tray with deliberate care and gave me her full, serious attention. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion I was trying hard to control. "You saved me from absolute disaster." "I've been watching her for a few days," Celia said quietly, her eyes darting around to make sure no other staff or diners were eavesdropping. "She was doing something to your drinks, ma'am, every time you left the table or when she had a chance. I work in hospitality. I know the signs of someone being drugged. The confusion, the disorientation, the way you'd seem fine one minute and utterly lost the next." My legs almost gave out underneath me. Having my suspicions confirmed by an impartial witness was both deeply validating and intensely terrifying. The systematic nature of the crime, the Aunt Clara story, the pill swapping, all snapped into devastating focus. "Will you help me prove it?" I asked, my voice now firm with a cold, desperate resolve. She nodded without hesitation, her brown eyes meeting mine with absolute conviction. "The A non-disclosed security office has cameras everywhere on this ship, ma'am. We can check the footage from tonight and likely from the past few days, too. They record every movement in public areas, including the dining hall and the bar area." As we walked toward the ship's administrative offices, my mind was racing with questions and dark implications. If Serafina was drugging me, what was her precise endgame? What did she hope to accomplish by having me officially deemed mentally incompetent? And, more importantly, was my son Marcus involved in this plot to destroy me? The thought made me physically sick, but I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The security footage held the answer. The ship's a non-disclosed security chief, a serious man in his mid-50s with kind eyes and a non-nonsense demeanor named Captain Donovan, led Eleanor and Celia into a small, windowless office dominated by a large bank of monitors. The room hummed with the quiet efficiency of constant surveillance. Captain Donovan, listening intently to Celia's account of the napkin warning and the subsequent glass switch, quickly pulled up the recordings from our dinner table in the Grand Arthurian Hall. The cameras had captured everything in terrifying, crystal-clear detail from multiple angles, with timestamps that would make the evidence indisputable in any court of law. "Show me the moment she left the table," Captain Donovan instructed his technician, a young man who manipulated the controls with professional speed. The footage immediately cut to a view of the table. We watched Serafina excuse herself, claiming she needed to refresh her makeup. The camera followed her movements as she stopped at the bar service station, not heading toward the restrooms. She ordered 2 glasses of the A non-disclosed expensive red wine and waited while the bartender poured them with mechanical precision. "There," Celia whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "Right there." As the bartender turned away momentarily to serve another customer, Serafina glanced around quickly to make sure no one was watching her closely. She reached into her small, velvet evening purse and pulled out what looked like a miniature silver dispenser, a sleek, modern version of a glass vial. "Can you zoom in on her hand and the glass?" Captain Donovan asked his technician. The image enlarged, magnified the crime until it filled the central monitor. We could clearly see her fingers working with practiced, chilling efficiency, unscrewing a miniature cap and tapping a small burst of fine white powder into one of the wine glasses. She stirred it quickly with a decorative cocktail stirrer, smoothly disposed of the empty dispenser back into her purse, and carried both glasses back to our table with a dazzling, triumphant smile. The one on the left, placed directly to your right, was the contaminated glass, Celia confirmed quietly. She made sure to place it precisely on your side of the table. Captain Donovan turned back to the live feed of our table, adjusting the playback speed. We watched the exchange, minute by minute. We saw Serafina return and set the glasses down. We saw the slight movement of my hand as I reached across, covered by the shadow of the large centerpiece, and executed the switch. Then, we watched the toast. The camera captured the chilling moment as Serafina raised the drugged glass, the one intended for me, and took a long, satisfied, celebratory sip. That confirms the victim's account and the witness statement, Captain Donovan stated calmly, though his face reflected cold disgust. This wasn't a one-time thing, Mrs. Hayes. This was planned, premeditated, and executed with professional precision. She's been systematically administering a substance to induce symptoms of severe cognitive decline. The horror of the image, seeing the poisoning happen, seeing the malice in her eyes, was immense. The fog that had plagued my mind for weeks was now completely banished, replaced by a cold, cutting clarity. I knew exactly what she had done and why. The goal was not a quick kill, but a slow, public breakdown that would lead to a court-ordered guardianship for her own protection, giving them control of the Hayes estate. But one terrifying question remained. Marcus, my own son. Captain, I said, my voice quiet but rock steady. Was my son, Marcus, involved in the administration of this substance? Did he assist her? Captain Donovan looked sympathetic but cautious. The footage only shows Miss Serafina manipulating the substance and the glasses, Mrs. Hayes. Your son was distracted on the dance floor and appears to be genuinely surprised by her subsequent disorientation. I cannot definitively comment on his prior knowledge or involvement in the larger scheme based on this evidence alone. His words offered a tiny, desperate flicker of hope. That Marcus was merely a manipulated fool, blinded by lust and ambition, rather than a co-conspirator in matricide. I understand, I said, rising from my seat. The confusion of the past weeks shed like a worn-out coat. Captain Donovan, I need you to secure this footage immediately. I want 2 copies made, one for me, and one held under absolute lock and key in the ship's safe, detailing the chain of custody. It's already being secured, Mrs. Hayes, he assured me, impressed by my sudden, formidable composure. This kind of felony on a vessel is treated with the utmost seriousness. We will cooperate fully with the authorities upon docking. And the substance? I pressed. Is it possible to test the contents of the contaminated glass? We collected the glass she drank from, along with the residue in the other glass. Our lab will analyze it immediately. We will have a preliminary identification before we disembark. I looked at the monitor, seeing the close-up of the powder hitting the wine. This was the weapon that destroyed Aunt Clara. This was the weapon meant to destroy me. Thank you, Celia, I said, turning to the waitress. You saved my life and my legacy. I will ensure you are protected and compensated when we return to shore. I just did the right thing, ma'am, she replied, her eyes still worried. I retrieved my room key and my small bag from Captain Donovan's desk, items Sarah had controlled for days. My plan begins now, Captain. I will not confront them until we are on dry land, where the law has jurisdiction, and I have a team of lawyers waiting. Until then, they must believe their plan worked. I walked out of that office a different woman, no longer the vulnerable widow, but Eleanor Hayes, a determined woman with concrete evidence of an attempted crime and a need for terrible, necessary justice. The cruise was over. The reckoning had begun. My son, innocent or guilty, would face the truth with me. Within hours of securing the footage, Captain Donovan returned to the administrative office with the preliminary analysis of the residue found in the glasses. He placed a formal document, stamped with the ship's official seal, on the desk in front of Eleanor. "Mrs. Hayes, the preliminary analysis is complete," Captain Donovan stated, his expression grave. "The residue in the contaminated glass, the one Ms. Serafina drank, and the traces we found in your medication organizer is consistent with a potent benzodiazepine derivative. It is a powerful sedative commonly used to treat anxiety, but when administered without medical supervision, it causes rapid cognitive impairment, severe disorientation, and amnesia." He paused, letting the medical reality sink in. "In short, Miss Serafina was methodically giving you a drug designed to make you appear to be experiencing a severe mental breakdown or early onset dementia. It also explains the extreme drowsiness and slurring she experienced." The knowledge was terrifying, yet deeply empowering. It wasn't just a random poison, it was a targeted chemical weapon aimed at destroying my mind and, consequently, my legal standing. "And my son, Marcus?" I asked, the question catching in my throat. "Did he buy this drug? Is there any record of his involvement?" "That information is beyond our jurisdiction, Mrs. Hayes. We only know who administered it, which is Ms. Serafina. However," the captain continued, looking thoughtful, "we did check the records. Ms. Serafina's profession as a high-end real estate agent often involves transactions with wealthy private clients who may require discretion and, sometimes, have complex medical histories. She would have had numerous professional contacts who could procure this drug without raising suspicion toward her fiancé." The implication was clear. Serafina was the professional predator, the one with the means and the knowledge, while Marcus was merely the opportunistic facilitator. The next morning, the ship arrived at its final destination, the port of a non-disclosed European city. I had spent the night awake, meticulously planning my moves, consulting with a trusted attorney via encrypted satellite phone. I made arrangements for a local specialist to meet me immediately and confirm the presence of the drug in my system, providing irrefutable medical documentation. I met Marcus and Serafina in the main lobby, maintaining a facade of weary confusion. Serafina, though pale and subdued, was back to her usual sharp self, her exhaustion replaced by cold anger. She glared at me, likely calculating how to spin the previous night's drunken disaster as a temporary illness. "Mom, you look like death," Marcus muttered, visibly stressed. He was trying to act normal, but his eyes darted everywhere. "Sarah had a terrible allergic reaction last night," the doctor said. "Something in the food." "Oh, really?" I said, my voice soft, almost frail. "That's terrible, dear. I've been so confused this morning. I can barely remember where our luggage is." I leaned heavily on the arm of the ship's representative, playing my role perfectly. Serafina gave me a tight, professional smile. "Don't worry, Ellie. I've organized everything. The driver is waiting for us and I'll handle all the customs forms. You just lean on me." The irony of her offer to handle everything was almost unbearable. As we walked toward the gangway, I noticed two well-dressed individuals, not ship personnel, standing calmly near the customs checkpoint. They were police officers, dressed in civilian clothes, waiting for the ship's manifest. Once we passed through the final security gate onto the pier, I stopped. Captain Donovan, accompanied by two ship security guards, walked up to us, his face grim. "Miss Serafina, Mr. Hayes," the captain announced, his voice carrying authority. "We have reason to believe that a serious crime was committed aboard this vessel involving the administration of a restricted substance. The ship's security footage and preliminary lab results indicate a violation of maritime law. Serafina's composure shattered. Her face went white, her jaw dropping as she stammered, I don't know what you're talking about. It was an allergic reaction. It was an attempted chemical assault, Ms. Serafina, I said, dropping the confused act and meeting her eyes with a cold, terrifying intensity that made her physically recoil. And I watched you do it. The police officers moved in swiftly. Ms. Serafina, you are being detained for questioning regarding aggravated assault and endangerment, one officer stated, showing his badge. Serafina fought back, yelling hysterically, Marcus, tell them she's crazy. She's losing her mind. It's all just paranoia. Marcus was frozen, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and fear. The face of a man caught completely unprepared. I looked at my son, letting the silence scream the truth. Marcus, I said gently, I know you were uncomfortable with the timeline. Now is the time to tell the police everything. Marcus was taken into separate custody, not as an initial suspect in the drugging, but as a key witness to the conspiracy. Serafina, screaming accusations of senility and paranoia, was led away, her elegant gown contrasting sharply with the harsh reality of her handcuffs. I was immediately escorted by my new legal team, a formidable local attorney and my longtime family lawyer who had flown in, to a private clinic for a full toxicology report. The crisis was over, but the full reckoning was just beginning. I had exposed the predator, but I still had to determine the extent of my son's betrayal. The truth about the Hayes estate and the timeline was finally within reach. After securing the necessary medical documentation confirming the presence of the powerful benzodiazepine derivative in my system, I was finally ready to face my son, Marcus. The police had released him from mandatory questioning after concluding he was not the primary administrator of the drug, but his hands were far from clean. My legal team escorted me to a private conference room at the local police station. Marcus was sitting there, alone, looking utterly devastated and completely unlike the sharp, self-assured investment banker I knew. He was pale, his expensive suit wrinkled, and the tension around his eyes was now a permanent mask of guilt and fear. Mom, he whispered, standing up immediately, his voice cracking. I am so sorry. I didn't know. Not the drugging. I swear to God, I didn't know the extent of it. Sit down, Marcus, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the internal turmoil. I placed the medical report and a copy of the security footage stills on the table. I have the police report, the lab results, and the video evidence of Serafina preparing a chemical substance to destroy my mind. Now, you tell me the truth about the timeline and the plan you two argued about the other night. He collapsed back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. It was the house, Mom. It was always the house and your liquid assets. Serafina. She convinced me that with the market the way it is, the Hayes estate alone could fund the new venture at a non-disclosed financial group and secure our future. He looked up, tears finally gathering in his eyes. The plan was to gently convince you to sell the house and move into a non-disclosed exclusive retirement home. A really good one, Mom, I swear, once your confusion episodes got bad enough. The timeline she pushed for was getting you to sign over medical power of attorney on this trip, not the drugging. I thought she was just giving you supplements to calm your anxiety so you'd be agreeable. You honestly believed your fiancé was a doctor dispensing powerful sedatives? I challenged, my voice cutting through his pathetic excuse. Or did you just choose to ignore the red flags because the payoff was the controlling stake in your firm? Marcus buried his head in his hands again, admitting the painful, terrible truth that I already knew in my heart. She said if we waited until your memory naturally declined, it would take years. She proposed we subtly accelerate the process by creating a paper trail of increasing confusion. She found the facility, told me about her Aunt Clara, and got me to agree to use her contacts to get the initial medical power of attorney signed before we returned. She promised it would be quick, clean, and totally legal once you were deemed incompetent. You were going to commit me, Marcus, I stated flatly. You were going to steal my home, liquidate the Hayes estate that your father built, and dump me in a facility, all for a controlling stake in a non-disclosed financial group. You were a willing participant in the conspiracy to exploit and disinherit me. He protested desperately. No, I was desperate for the capital. She made it sound like the only way to save my career. I never intended for you to be harmed, Mom. I told her the drugging was too far. I tried to stop the timeline. You tried to stop it by having a whisper fight on a cruise ship and then going along with the plan the next morning, I observed, the cold contempt evident in every syllable. You prioritized your ambition over the well-being of your own mother. You let a predator into our lives and gave her the blueprint for my destruction. I pushed the medical report closer to him. Serafina is facing aggravated assault charges and federal wire fraud charges. The police are now looking into the status of her Aunt Clara and a possible pattern of behavior. I have a recorded statement from the ship's waitress, medical proof of the drug in my system, and the video of Serafina preparing the poison. She's finished, Marcus. She will spend a long time where she belongs. But what about me, Mom? Marcus pleaded, tears streaming down his face now. I can fix this. I can testify against her. I'll give you back the shares. Just tell me what I need to do. I looked at my son, the man I had raised and sacrificed for, and saw only the reflection of Serafina's greed. His concern wasn't for my suffering, but for his own impending ruin. You've already done what you needed to do, Marcus, I said, standing up to signify the end of the meeting. You helped her set the trap. You provided the access and the cover she needed. You are no longer part of my life, or the Hayes estate, or my future. Any relationship we had is irrevocably broken. I gave the remaining documents to my lawyer, Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies will handle all communication from this point forward. He will issue a formal cease and desist notice, severing all personal and financial ties. I will not press criminal charges against you personally. I won't give Serafina an easy defense. But you will be held accountable for any misuse of my funds or accounts during the time you colluded with her. I paused at the door. You were right about one thing, Marcus. I am going to sell the Hayes estate, and every penny will go toward establishing a foundation to help vulnerable seniors protect their assets from people exactly like you and Serafina. That is your legacy. I walked out of the room, leaving him alone with the wreckage of his ambition. The reckoning for Serafina was incarceration. The reckoning for Marcus was the complete, final loss of his mother's love and the certainty that his fortune would now be used to fight the very crime he had enabled. I was free of both of them. The months that followed the arrests and the final disembarkation were filled with legal proceedings, financial reconstruction, and a deliberate, focused cleansing of my life. Serafina was quickly prosecuted. Given the irrefutable video evidence, the detailed lab reports, the testimony of Celia, and the discovery of similar drug components traced to a prior incident involving her Aunt Clara, she received a substantial, non-parolable sentence for aggravated chemical assault and conspiracy to commit elder fraud. The A non-disclosed exclusive retirement home was placed under criminal investigation. My son, Marcus, faced his own reckoning. Though I did not press criminal charges, the damage to his reputation and career was total. His involvement in the conspiracy, even peripherally, was enough for the board of a non-disclosed financial group to force his resignation. He lost his career, his fiancée, and all prospects of inheriting the Hayes estate capital. I maintained the cease and desist order. My relationship with him was terminated. I sold the Hayes estate house. It was a beautiful structure, but it was tainted by memory and the residue of greed. The proceeds were immense and, combined with the substantial liquid assets Arthur and I had accrued, provided the initial endowment for the Arthur Hayes Foundation for Elder Protection, AHFEP. I channeled all my energy into this new purpose. My mission was simple: to ensure no other vulnerable senior would be chemically or financially exploited for their assets. I became the patron, the founder, and the chief advocate, using my voice and my story, the one I had almost lost, to build a powerful legacy. 1 year later, I stood in the vast, bright reception area of the newly established AHFEP headquarters, located in the central business district of a non-disclosed coastal town. It wasn't a palatial building, but it was professionally designed, dignified, and bustling with activity. I was giving a final, confident address to my new staff, a team of lawyers, social workers, and financial fraud investigators. Our work is simple, I told them, my voice strong and clear, no longer suffering from confusion or doubt. We are the first line of defense. We are here to listen to the whispers others ignore, to spot the predators hiding behind welcome mats, and to remind every older adult that their dignity and their assets must be earned honestly. That is the final truth Serafina has to live with. A young social worker, Ms. Davis, approached me, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Mrs. Hayes, thank you. You've given us a purpose that truly changes lives." I shook her hand firmly. My revenge was not a moment of destructive glee when I saw Serafina arrested. It was this quiet, powerful act of creation. Later that day, I was sitting on my own front porch swing at my magnificent new seaside home, a custom-built, smaller residence overlooking the ocean, funded entirely by my independent assets and investment returns from the Arthur Trust. The house was designed around light and the sea, emphasizing comfort, not ostentation. I was finishing a sketch for a new large landscape painting, a view of the ocean that symbolized my final, tranquil chapter. 2 years later, my foundation, HFEP, was thriving, having successfully intervened in dozens of exploitation cases. I was fulfilling my original life ambition, spending my days painting and dedicating my resources to real, structural change. My phone buzzed. It was a photo from an unknown number. It was a picture of Marcus. He wasn't clean-cut or smug. He was working at a community center's financial literacy program, helping new immigrants understand basic banking. He looked older, tired, but the expression on his face was one of honest, quiet effort. He was not a rich investment banker. He was a working man, earning his way back one genuine good deed at a time. I didn't reach out, but I didn't delete the photo either. His reckoning was painful, but perhaps restorative. I picked up an old, beautiful compass Arthur had given me, now permanently housed in my new library. It was no longer a symbol of lost direction. It was the trophy of the unseen canvas, the masterpiece of my final, formidable chapter. I was Eleanor Hayes, the widow, the advocate, and the woman who taught her family that love and trust, unlike capital gains, cannot be successfully extorted. I had won back my mind, my dignity, and my peace. What an absolutely terrifying yet ultimately triumphant story from Eleanor Hayes. She didn't just survive the poisoning. She engineered the perfect takedown, secured her legacy, and built the Arthur Hayes Foundation for elder protection. The level of calculated cruelty is staggering, but Eleanor's cold, sharp revenge is a masterclass in survival. What did you think of Marcus's weak betrayal? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, we want to hear your story next. Send your most shocking tale of revenge, transformation, or justice to womenstoriessegmail.com for a chance to be featured on Women's Stories.